Joy de Viva, which I guess translates to joy of living or joy from living, is another slightly funky tune that reminds me a bit of Hawkwind in a way, especially with its verses featuring the classic organ and what sounds like a guitar being played and amplified underwater. Speaking of which, the lyrics themselves speak of a woman who took the singer Paul Roberts' smile from his face and hid it in a secret place. So, is it going to turn out that she's a face stealer or something? Then Paul sings about the surroundings around him in a sort of stream of consciousness, seeing the trees but not woods while slipping into a pool and floating on the icy flood. But a voice calls to him, ordering to bring the coals and light the fire, bringing a sense of warmth to the cold. Then the bright chorus comes along, telling us that if we see her, we should tell her that he needs her, and smile a shining smile. A short but still very sweet bit. Then in the second verse, he mentions sunburnt men, likely a callback to Valley of the Birds, where the Birdman got his face tanned. And like Silver into Blue, it might also be about a sailor sailing in the ocean deep and not fearing the siren winds and the crashing rocks. Then he goes to find this woman by running into her fire. No doubt a metaphor for her love and passion, or literally being burnt alive as a result. Yeah. That all being said, though, this song may sound less like Stranglers and more Smiths in the delivery of both vocals and music in general, which kind of makes sense as both did come from the sort of post-punk scene of the early 80s. Doesn't make it bad, though. All in all, Joy de Viva is an all-around joyful song. Just keep an open taste with this one, just like with most of the album so far. After that is Miss You, which more or less returns to slightly familiar territory, but in a more evolved form of their punky music, with a gritty guitar and a fast rhythmic drum beat. Here, Paul sings about a person who plans to deliberately miss the morning train, wants the world to feel their pain, and tears up some rules, believing that it would ease their mind. So basically, someone with a victim complex. They should go on Twitter then. And in the chorus, Paul, along with some backing vocals, presumably from fellow bandmates, stress how he won't miss her, expressing how even when they've broken up, he's not bothered by it one bit. If anything, he seems glad about it, knowing about this woman's selfishness and toxicity. I honestly think most people can relate to a song like this. Those who have suffered from frustrations and recent heartbreaks, how the other person they've been in a long relationship with is not exactly the bright romantic one they may seem. Instead, come across as someone who's dominant and abusive. And this song kind of captures those who feel such hardships and all around just unnecessary heartbreak. And on a strange and possibly funny side note, the Stranglers made another song also titled Miss You in the next album the following year, Coup de Grace, which is very different from this one, that one being about 5 minutes and much calmer and much slower. They really should have called this one I Won't Miss You. I mean, if you're gonna have two songs with similar titles, at least tell your own songs apart. Title them differently, especially when they're made so closely together in like two albums so close together. Aside from that, though, this is still an okay song that, in a way, deconstructs songs about love, romance, and breakups, fully accepting such and moving on from it all. A rebellion against a rebellion. Next is Daddy's Riding the Range, which continues that evolution of their classic familiar territory, an expansion of their comfort zone. Another dreamy yet slightly haunting track that seems to deal with dreams and childhoods, with verse lines such as "Walk your parry dreams" and "Whispers of worlds you'll see." They seem to represent how often Our dreams and make-believe fantasies are, in some ways, reflections of our realities, similar to the Spike Jonze adaptation of Where the Wild Things Are. Then in the chorus, the father, or daddy, seems to be, well, riding the range, while wearing a cowboy costume apparently given to him by his own mother, likely referring to how, as kids, we look up to our parents, and in turn, they themselves look up to their own parents, our grandparents. So the verses could be from the perspective of the father, being called by the child and having to ride into the night, and the chorus is from an omnipresent source, addressing how this father will never stop loving his child, and how he'll send down the sun if they cried, spin around the world if they ever get lost, and he would even ride the trail of the Lone Star if to prove it. And possibly be in a generally funny Star Wars parody film where he has to team up with furry John Candy and fight Darth Rick Moranis. Then we have Summer in the City, a cover version of a song by 60s American rock pop group The Loving Spoonful. Possibly one of the few times I can recall the Stranglers ever doing a cover version of any song. While the original song was mostly light, upbeat, and even a bit psychedelic, this version ups the psychedelia tenfold and doses it with some industrial grit. Though that could just be me exaggerating a bit. While the lyrics are entirely the same, basically spending a good summer night in the city or a city, the clunky music here makes it slightly sinister in a way, like we're venturing into a more grungier part of this particular city, and something is just creeping around the corners. We even hear some brief screeching of wheels to fit the intense mood. Whether this version is better than the original is still up for personal tastes and opinions, and I'll leave that to you. I like both for being their own things. I managed to check out the original, and they're both pretty decent. Not every cover version of a song has to be exactly like the original. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Instead, build your own unique replica that still works the same more or less. And so our album ends with Wonderful Land, an interesting closer that sounds a bit on par with Porcupine Tree and Marillion at the time, with its bizarre and distinct guitars, audible bass, and a bit of string synth. Its lyrics speak of memories and nostalgia, the singer having found an old photograph, a sepia memory. Paul goes on to describe certain details in this particular individual picture, such as a house by the sea, a mother laughing, and a face kissed by sunlight. The song also mentions being under Albion's hand. Albion is actually an ancient name for the island that would become known as Great Britain, so using it here does add this poetic and almost timeless layer to the overall track. The song goes on to show, and it goes to show that photos are more than just mere pictures. They each carry a memory. They're each a memory. They capture a certain moment of our lives, our time spending together as a family. And more often than not, they're more precious than we'd let on, and we take such for granted. The music itself does help in capturing that sense of nostalgia, with Paul here definitely channeling Hugh Cornwell, but still somewhat distinct. The track itself doesn't exactly go out on a high note, however, but rather goes out with some brief faint tapping of cymbals, and that's it. The song just kind of ends then and there. And so, that was written in red by the Stranglers, and honestly, it's not too bad. Nothing groundbreaking or innovative or anything, but still a very interesting and curious album nonetheless. One could tell this was definitely part of a sort of transitional period for the band. Still kind of being off the departure from Hugh, like seven-ish years prior, but still trying to find their footing in kind of balancing their old styles with a new fresh approach. And I can understand why a lot of people and even some of the band members themselves have kind of forgotten about this and moved on, with the bassist himself, Jean-Jacques Bonnel, saying, It had nothing to do with me apart from one or two songs. I've got no feelings about it as an album, and as I was disconnected from it all. I had given up on the band. It wasn't a band anymore, just John and Paul and a guy with Pro Tools. Unquote. Now to that I say, don't you go be knocking Pro Tools. As a student at ARU, using it isn't exactly easy. But regardless, though, I can still understand how he may feel that way. Sometimes some band members can feel left out of a particular album or project, or feel like they weren't exactly interesting enough to put as much contribution to them. But I still think some of his bass are still noticeable regardless, particular with some ones like the ending song Wonderful Land and one or two others. And I still love the more unique songs like In the Wild and Valley of the Birds. So I still kind of recommend it in some way, if you can keep an open mind, of course. I'd recommend looking for it on CD or vinyl, but being a very obscure album, it's probably very tricky to find a copy of it anywhere. If you're able to listen to it online or streaming, like Spotify or Bandcamp or whatever, I'd say take a chance and give it a listen. Perhaps you might find something worthwhile. Next time, though, we take a look at a more well-known album, as we take things a little low with the man who fell to earth himself, the Starman.